It's always a pleasure to be here at Canonkill Institute here in Merida, Mexico, and I'm excited to have the opportunity today to share with you some tips for preparing for and optimizing the conditions for collaborative dialogue. The first thing that I want to say is that from my perspective, dialogue requires a shift in mindset. And the mindset will begin to naturally guide your actions so that you can invite other people to join you in collaborative dialogue. In other words, the conditions for dialogue and the stance of the inviter flow from this mindset that's based in a set of assumptions from postmodern philosophy and social construction theory, among some other perspectives. I want to say that I don't think that dialogue is something that can be planned. I don't think it can be structured. And I don't think that it requires particular personal attributes or repeatable skills. I think the conditions for dialogue are many and they're intertwined and none stand alone. First of all, I think that dialogue requires collaborative design. That means that the inviter of the dialogue does not come to the invitation for dialogue with a set of expectations in terms of what the dialogue will look like and what the outcome of the dialogue will be. That the inviter has to be open to truly trusting and believing in the other person's contributions. I think that the collaborative design is part of the process of generating newness in meaning and action. So collaborative dialogue and its design requires inviting, learning about, and respecting the other person's expertise. In other words, the intention of dialogue must be dialogue itself, without, again, the idea of exactly what the outcome should look like. Another way of saying it is that each dialogue is unique to the participants, their situations, their circumstances, and their goals for the meeting or the conversation. Another way of saying it is that dialogue is a natural, spontaneous activity. It cannot be implemented, orchestrated, or managed. It occurs moment to moment. It's also rhizomatic, meaning that there's no one entryway into a dialogue and that no one entryway is more correct than another. Dialogue wanders and it pauses. It can be harmonious, but most of the time it's not, because if it's harmonious, then everyone agrees there's no really reason to talk. So dialogue is often filled with tensions, with differences, and that those are necessary in terms of always being in the process of trying to learn about and understand the other's perspective. Because always being in the process of understanding and learning about the other is an important aspect of dialogue. That also means that dialogue is often filled with unclarity, ambiguities, misunderstandings, uncertainty, and incoherencies. Dialogue is also multidimensional in terms of not only the different perspectives that each person brings, but each person also has their own, or his or her own, multiple perspectives. Each encounter, each dialogue includes the past, the present, and the future. Now, pause, let me turn my page. One of the most challenging aspects of dialogue, I think, is the importance of being able to have complete trust in the other person, that what the other person has to say is worthy of hearing, and that it's worth your time to try to understand as best one can what it is that they want you to hear. In dialogue, hearing and understanding doesn't necessarily mean agreement or supporting of the other person's position. But it's very important to be able to continue that back and forth, or what you might think of as the witness process of dialogue, being in there together, doing something together, rather than one person trying to do something for another person. A lot of times when people think of dialogue, they're thinking of outer talk, the spoken words. But dialogue really entails any way in which we're trying to express or articulate ourselves or communicate with another person, as well as with ourselves. So that's not only out loud talk, but it's also silent talk, inner thoughts, any way in which we try to express. And that part of the importance of inviting dialogue is being able to invite into the conversation, into the dialogue, those inner thoughts, those inner conversations that your dialogical partner is having, as well as being able to express your own inner talk and be forthcoming with that. Also important to dialogue are pauses and silences, because dialogue involves speaking, listening, hearing, all are part of responding to the other person. We often are so busy preparing our responses to the other person that we don't really pause to think about and be careful in terms of how we respond to what I think of as their response to us. Pauses and silences not only give the inviter of the dialogue the opportunity to think about what they're going to say, to think about what they've just heard, but it gives everyone involved in the dialogue that opportunity. So in other words, in dialogue, conversation or talk is slowed down some. Dialogue is also not continuous. It can start, it can stop, it can have longer pauses. The pause can be from one meeting to the next. And when that occurs, it's also important to keep in mind that the participants also have their own outer dialogues with other people in between the particular meetings, or conversational paths along the way, as well as their own inner thoughts and dialogues. So when you think that you're returning to a dialogue that you had before, you were never really returning to it. You're never really picking up where you left off. You and other conversational partners are always at a new place. One of the sort of clues or cues that you're not involved in a dialogue with yourself or with another person is when you find yourself having these internal judgments and kind of waiting till they finish so that you can then say what you want to say, thinking that you're acting respectful, but it's really not respectful if internally you're totally disagreeing with or dismissing or judging their particular perspective. You have to truly believe that there's something valuable there that they have to say. Again, that doesn't mean that you're agreeing with it. Also, if you find yourself trying to convince the other person of your view or of your rightness, or on the edge of your chair waiting to offer your perspective, that most likely you're doing things that disrupt or interrupt a dialogue. Dialogue also, as I said, is sporadic. It wanders, it takes this path, it takes that path, and it can never really be traced back to its beginning. So whatever the outcome of dialogue is, there's not a linear progression. There's not a cause and effect component. The intent of dialogue, from my perspective, is to create a process of what I think of as dynamic sustainability. That what you want is a process that continues on its own, not necessarily a product or a resolution or a solution that can be tied up in a nice, neat package, but something that is livable beyond those moments. And that is really the challenge, because we live in worlds in which we think in terms of resolutions or solutions, which again can be an impediment to dialogue when you go in with that idea that you have to resolve or solve something through dialogue, and particularly when you have an idea about what that outcome should be. Again, you have to be able to live with uncertainty, with differences, with ambiguity, with lack of clarity, with tension. Those are all important aspects of dialogue. Thank you.